Welcome to this talk at the Speaker's Corner at the 2025 EBNet Evolutionaries Conference, and talking to the topic of AI in the asset management field is what I believe as being one of the only adopters of AI in South African investment management, and that is Differential Capital. So I'm joined by Dr. Musa Malwandla, but this is a doctor that you wouldn't want around you with a scalpel or even a thermometer, I think, because Musa is a finance professional, been around our industry for 14 years. He has a PhD in finance and an MSc in statistics. He's a top-rated analyst, and that includes having skills in data science, credit risk modeling, actuarial analysis, financial modeling. I'm reading all of this. I don't know what it means. You're going to have to explain to us. He's got a lot of experience in model development and has developed models specifically from an asset management perspective. He serves as the co-CIO, which is interesting, of Differential Capital, where he's specifically responsible for artificial intelligence and data science in their investment process. So that's the introduction. Musa, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us ahead of time, and we look forward to the discussion.
It's a pleasure. Thanks.
Right, so let's start off. What is the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning?
Yeah, so machine learning are techniques that ultimately can be used to achieve an aim, which is, artificial intelligence. So machine learning is a branch of tools. In fact, if you think about where it dates back to, in the past, it used to be called decision science. Before that, it was operations research. It's the same tool set. So to give you a practical example, something called a decision tree is within the toolkit of a machine learning professional. But in the past, in the 1990s, 2000s, that was used in operations research and credit risk modeling. So machine learning is really an assortment of tools that are used to solve problems, whereas artificial intelligence is then the specific feature, which is things that are automated, automated reasoning and those kinds of things.
So you use the term reasoning. So I always used to go into Google and I would search for something, and then I learned, maybe I can ask Google a question and it will give me an answer. Or I'd get my Apple HomePod and I'd ask Siri what the weather was. Now I'm using Grok and I'm asking Grok to put together articles and research papers, even give me fancy names for podcasts that I run and so on. So is artificial intelligence simply Google with a reasoning capability?
That's an interesting one. So there is an active question at the moment of, can AI systems or machine learning models really, really truly think and reason? So at the moment, what they are doing is simple prediction, right? It sounds silly when you think about it, but when you train a large language model, which is what most people are used to do these days as representative of AI, what you're training usually is next token prediction. In other words, given a sequence of words, what's the most likely next word? That's ultimately the core of most of AI. Although we sometimes separate AI into predictive AI or generative AI, it's all predictive. They're trained to predict stuff, right? Now, the question is within that layer of reasoning, layer of prediction, can real reasoning and intelligence emerge? And we are not quite sure about that, because it turns out, so there are a few examples or tests that people have tried to sort of trick AI into figuring out whether it's truly reasoning or if it's just mimicking pattern behavior, matching patterns and so on. And at the moment, it does remain an open problem. We are not truly sure about whether it's true reasoning or just complex next token prediction.
Okay, so that almost talks to the concept of bias a little bit. And I remember watching the Grok launch, and it was Elon Musk with a couple of guys that looked like they came out of nursery school, talking to the capability and how it stacked up relative to ChatGPT and the others. And there's been criticism around the likes of ChatGPT and it having biases in terms of being a bit woke based on how it's been trained. All right. Interesting term, training it. So I always hear we're training the AI. So I read into that to be, okay, we're putting a whole lot of information in, and then based on whatever these formulas are, the models that it's based on, it then interprets that information and is able to then regurgitate that based on questions that it's asked at any point in time. Is that overly simplified, or is that correct? And why would some have biases? Does it mean they've been trained with a specific intent?
Yeah, so it's a good point. So bias can actually come from multiple areas. So let me just take you through the journey of training a large language model, which is only one type. I just want to be clear, it's one type of AI. There are many types. Now, with large language, the first is what is called pre-training, where you'll just usually it's next token prediction. Sometimes it's you remove a word or a token from a sequence of words, and you ask the model to figure out to predict which word best completes the sequence. So it's like a little game, as you might think about it, is you're removing a word or you're saying, given this word, what comes next. So that's pre-training. So that's what you call a base model before you've done anything else. So when you take a model like that, you can't converse with it. You can't give it tasks. You can't do anything with it. If you give it a request saying, do this for me, all it will do is try and complete the word. So if you say, well, get me the weather, it might say, and then get me this, and it's just trying to predict what comes next. Now, the problem is within that pre-training, bias can come in that what corpus of information are you using to do the training? So for instance, one of the problems at the moment is that Reddit seems to be a massive part of the pre-training corpus for a lot of these large language models, and the kind of information and sometimes junk that sits within these platforms like Reddit or Twitter or wherever else is now part of the base corpus of information that the model is pre-trained on. Now, after the pre-training, there's another important step, which is now you want to then make it, it's called an instruct version of a model, where now it's able to take instruction. So that's now a more nuanced version of the training, where you would say, you would give it an example, get me the weather, and then give it a good way of completing, or what comes next, rather than just simply giving an open sequence. You're saying this is what a good response looks like, so that it generalizes around the idea of giving, taking instruction and giving feedback, right? So that's the instruct phase of the training. What then comes next is then specialization. So now you have this model that can take instruction, but now you want to take instruction in a particular way, right? So let's say in the context of finance, if I give a model an instruction of, go and analyze this company for me, an open-ended instruction, go and analyze all the information about this company, I know as an investment professional what kind of information I'm looking for. I'm usually not looking for, when the company, I'm looking for, usually financial information, strategy. Those are the kinds of things. So that's now the fine-tuning stage of the training. Now, again, in that fine-tuning, bias can come in, because that's where you might, want to train the model to avoid certain, loaded topics, respond in a politically correct manner, so that's another area so anywhere along all of these phases is scope for bias to creep in, and it's very difficult to actually control for that kind of bias.
So you segue there a little bit to finance. So that's where I'm now going in terms of this. So I've had two experiences as far as AI and finance is concerned. So the one goes back quite some time, I think about 15 years or so, when I was sitting in London and I met with, I think they were called the Man Group,
Yeah.
that managed, that was my first introduction to a portfolio manager who was showing me how they manage the portfolio using AI. And I'll never forget, he actually needed a cushion to sit on because he was also straight out of nursery school. And he showed me on his laptop, literally the model was, his term was scraping information off the net. and based on that live information was now making changes to the portfolio. Now maybe there was an element of marketing behind it, but there he was showing me literally the portfolio weightings changing live, so to speak, to take into consideration what the information that the model was feeding into it. I thought it was hocus pocus at the time. I thought, how on earth, this is very strange. But anyway, and I moved on. More recently, I used Grok, and I actually did it from the perspective of I wanted to test for bias, but I asked it to give me, I think it was 20 stocks that I should consider investing in globally that have high growth prospects. The bias was, first of all, that it basically gave me the stocks that had shown high growth, as would be expected. But I was also trying to check whether it had any sort of bias towards Tesla and a bias away from the likes of Google. And it didn't. It didn't recommend Tesla, and it did recommend Google. So that was my experience. Now, bringing it back to you guys, obviously a lot more sophisticated in terms of how you use AI within your environment. Can you comment on that? So what do you use AI for? Some people would think, oh, it's an AI fund manager, therefore the AI runs the portfolios, but I'm willing to bet that that's not the case. So can you explain to me where you use AI, to what degree you go to, and where are the limitations in your experience?
Yeah, this is also another great set of points. So I think we were, from the point when we started the business, we were quite clear. We wanted to use AI to amplify humans, right? So we think of humans and AI as team members that are all in service of this idea of generating alpha for clients. Now, in terms of how we use it within the investment process itself, we actually use it across the entire business, not just within investing, but our focus on investing is, so firstly, in finding ideas. So you spoke about, for instance, as a growth manager. So suppose you're a growth, you take a growth approach to, a style to investing. To find good high growth companies is actually not easy, right? And good quality ones. So we don't want to waste our analysts' time on looking in places where it's less likely that those companies exist. So we use AI to screen for ideas. So if, for instance, in the global fund, you have the MSCI World has 1,500 stocks, and we monitor in excess of 5,000 stocks actively, right, through our models. And the point is, on any given day, our analysts need to spend time well on ideas that are likely to yield alpha, right? So that's the first use of AI, to filter down the investment universe to give us a good set of high quality ideas. Now, how does the AI do that? So we use several things. So the first is traditional, I call it now traditional AI, which is you train a model on things like financial information, so company financials, price data, macroeconomic data. So the kinds of information that a normal financial analyst would look at anyway. But what we're trying to do is use AI to figure out deep structures within the data that signal opportunities in the future about that company. So as you pointed out, the past isn't always so. If you ask AI, it's likely that it might just give you things that have worked in the past, but you want to train a model so that it's geared to what your target is. And our target is trying to figure out companies that will likely revise their earnings upwards or do something different than what they did in the past. So that's the first use of AI, to just simply stop, prevent our analysts from wasting time on unfruitful ideas. The other type, we believe that there's a lot of information in the market, and not all of that information is used within the investment process. So we use data science in general. AI plays a role in this, and I'll explain in a moment, but it's more data science to find what we call alternative data. So different ways of looking at the same company that everyone is looking at, but bringing a slightly different data-driven angle to that same company. So a good practical example for this is if you think about a company like, a retail company. Usually when you approach that kind of companies, you'll speak with management, you'll go and, maybe read stats essay to figure out trends in South Africa, GDP and so on. What you don't look at is what they are selling, what products. So are they pricing well relative to their competitors? Because if you price poorly, you might lose margin, but you might also lose market share if you're too aggressive in how you price. So those are the kinds of things that you can actually get from just simply analyzing data in a different way. Another more practical example of using AI is customer reviews, right? So for all of our retailers, they're actually accessible data. So for our retailers, we scrape not monthly because it accumulates, but we have in excess of 1 million customer reviews for each of the listed retailers. So that means we can tell you at a store level which stores are problematic. And when you aggregate that upwards, you all of a sudden have a much better picture than what you would get from speaking to management. You know which stores are problematic, are likely to close, and whether management is dropping the ball in certain areas. So that's again another specific use of AI, right? And in this case, when it comes to things like biases, we are actually very targeted in how we use things like generative AI because we wouldn't give it an open problem like analyze a company. We would rather say, here are, millions of customer reviews. We certainly don't have the time to go through them, but AI can, I mean, ChatGPT or Anthropic or whatever else, sift through that within a few minutes, right? So that's another highly targeted use of AI. So yeah, so that's the other thing. Then the other more specific thing is then how we put portfolios together. In fact, this is an often ignored aspect of why AI is powerful or data science in general. Is it's not just about amplifying returns and therefore amplifying risk. It actually serves a very useful and powerful role in reducing risk. So if you think about the problem, I mean, I spoke about the MSCI world. Let's say you have a global fund, you have 1,500 stocks in your benchmark to optimize against. The problem of figuring out the best combination of assets to meet the objective of delivering alpha while controlling risk, things like tracking error, downside risk, is actually not a trivial problem. I don't, it's not well appreciated. You have to think about things like correlation and how stable those correlation structures are. You have to think about which ideas within your universe are actually likely to deliver more alpha than the others, what the risk profile within each asset looks like, and then using all of that information combined it into a portfolio. That's something that AI is actually quite powerful at doing, in that it considers all of the different combinations and figures out what the optimal risk reward relationship looks like. So that's another powerful use of AI. But as I said, so at a high level, those are the areas we use AI for. It's in being quick at arriving at ideas. In other words, finding high quality ideas to analyze. And then in analyzing those ideas, there are models and data sets that we're able to use in getting better quality investment theses, and then putting together those assets into a portfolio. Across that entire chain, AI is quite powerful.
Okay, so can I test then with you? You've got, call it, those three areas that's where you can utilize the AI to enhance, to create efficiency, to make better decisions.
Yeah.
As differential, you don't just let that then spit out an answer. You let it give you information, ultimately, that humans then analyze, and you combine that with further human intellect to arrive at your final decision. Why do you do that?
It's a good point. So there are two parts to the answer. So the first part is I am the co-CIO looking after data science. So I look at all of the AI models and so on. And then there's another co-CIO who looks after the fundamental piece. The reason we've done it that way is that my responsibility is delivering high quality models that would be able to stand to scrutiny on their own. In other words, if we were to deploy these models on their own, we would have some comfort that they would deliver alpha. But the problem is that we know that any model is ultimately backward looking. It's looking at data that is already in the past. If there are structural breaks in the data, all of a sudden the model doesn't work, right? So a practical example is now we are living in the era of Trump and tariff, Liberation Day and all of those things. To some degree, those have precedence in the past, but it is a very, very different world to the one that we've been living in the past 2 decades. So that's the point, is that specific cases where data in the past is no longer applicable in the future. That's a hard fact that we know about the world. And then the other is what we call data blind spots, is that any data will only ever tell you a part of the problem. So for instance, you can get all of the data you have on customer reviews, and it will not tell you about simple management, for the lack of a better word, stupidity, right? There are simple things that you can sitting across the management team, you can get from their body language, from practical things like that. Those are the things that humans are quite powerful at. And even at a portfolio stage, something like a look and feel of a portfolio, we have our co-CIO, Sam Julio, on the fundamental side, is 30 years of experience. There are things he has seen that the model probably hasn't, right? The nuances of markets. It's that kind of experience that we value in sort of shaping a portfolio beyond the raw data.
Would you use the example of looking at client feedback data? Would you then use that in management meetings to question management, to inform them of that view that you've got, or do you keep that to yourselves?
Yes, so we actually engage a lot. We've done quite a bit. So before I answer the question, so when we started the business, remember I said we saw AI and humans as a team. The idea here was, if AI does its job and does it well, our people will have a lot more time to add value where only they can add value, and that's in the area of engagement. So when it comes to engagement, things, with some of the, I won't mention the names, but some of the retailers that have been struggling with over the past few years, it allows us to sit across the management team, and actually it's no longer a conversation around what are you doing, are you going in the right direction. It's more a conversation of, these are the store reviews, this is the trend in the stores, this is where you were last year versus where you are today, what are you doing. Now there are cases where our data or management disagrees with the data. It could be that our data is wrong, and that goes back to those blind spots. We are aware customer reviews online will never be a full reflection of the truth, so we allow for those. But the point is, it allows for more robust discussions, right? And we've seen that not just in the example of retailers, across a few names that we've engaged with in the past.
I think that information is so powerful to unlock the truth and to have a discussion and a debate and create respect between parties as well, which I think is very important. So there's two questions I have for you before we then close, because you've given us a wealth of information and good understanding. But I've always been a believer in the asset management world of running an asset manager. You have tribes, and they're quite different tribes. You have your investment professionals, who are a certain kind of person. You have your administrative people, who are a certain kind of character, and you have your marketing people, who are also different in their own right. And you've got to make those tribes work together, all with the right intent. But sometimes those intents can clash, essentially. Now within investments, okay, you've almost got another tribe within the tribe, which is the data-driven technical AI side, and then you've got the Sam Hooleys of this world, who have been around for a long time, who are humans, and as humans we like to believe we are right. So how do you manage something like that? How do you get to a point where Sam actually trusts the data, trusts the AI, so that it is of value to him, rather than saying, okay, well, thanks for that, but no, thank you.
Yeah, that's another brilliant point. So this is actually something so in a lot of the conversation we see in market, in asset management, the focus is on how are you using data science and catching the trend and so on. Not enough focus on the actual culture within the business, because that's the real difficult part. So for us, from day one, we were always clear, we are data driven, right? That's what it all starts and ends with the data. That's we are aware that there are blind spots, but that means humans augment the facts that are present in the data. Okay. So now, in terms of how the data, the teams themselves organize, the most important thing is we are driven by the core philosophy of the business. That's ultimately the anchor around which we all congregate. So in other words, on the data science side, we are all figuring out how best to use data to serve the philosophy. So our philosophy is we are looking for earnings, expectations, revisions, right? So anything that could change in the near future within the company that the market isn't aware of, that once it becomes, patent knowledge, then it will change the views around the company. So that's, we are building models around that idea. When we interact with the fundamental team, right, as part of our morning meetings and so on, that means that's the premise through which we engage. And there's so, and maybe just the last point on this is the value, or the why we are lucky, I suppose, in having people like Sam is he actually has quite a good grasp of firstly what a philosophy is, right? So in other words, before you even delve into the specific philosophy we have, but why that's important and how it's important to articulate everything you do, your process, your approach through that philosophy, is because it allows us to work harmoniously together. So I think the point is, it's that driving, anchor, which is your philosophy. If you get that wrong, you'll end up using models that. So in other words, I could build a model that picks up growth companies, but it's not what the firm needs. We need expectations revisions, earnings revisions, changes. That's the anchor.
So just for the audience's understanding, you've spoken about data and models. So I don't want to get into too much detail. It'll be too complex then. But data is anything you feed into the model, and a large part of that is publicly available on the internet. But its reality is we can't see everything that's out there, so something's got to go find it for us, and that's where that helps. The model is something you develop, you code in terms of how to interpret the data to be able to answer effectively the questions that you're asking of it. Is that a good synopsis thereof?
Correct.
Okay.
And the data itself is so you made a good point, is that the data is out there, but the act of going to get it and organize it is actually a task unto itself, right? So I spoke about customer reviews. They are there, millions of them, but getting it is not straightforward. So once you have it, you now need to still do the work of modeling it, interpreting it.
So final question. All of this makes total sense, right? Why won't every asset manager end up just evolving into doing it this way? So first of all, everyone filters.
Yeah.
Okay, this surely makes sense in terms of how to filter. Everyone can do with more information, so surely this makes sense to be able to question management better and so on. So you get the point. Is this not just going to be a convergence to all using AI, or will there be AI differentiated managers out there, or does it come down to, sorry to answer your question, that philosophy and how you build the models?
So had you asked me this when we first started in our first year, I would have been worried, because it was so obvious to us that this has to be the future, right? As you say, everyone screens, but if there are better ways of screening, why don't you do it? Everyone needs information. If there are better ways of getting the information, why? It turns out that it's more the philosophy point that you were making, is that most asset managers are aligned to the Warren Buffett growth investing or value investing or quality and so on. These are fundamentally very long-term outlook. So in other words, you're investing for what will happen in 10 years' time. How we invest is more what will happen, what can change within the next few reporting cycles. Now, that's a very different orientation. So if you are thinking about the next 10 years, the data we are collecting around customer reviews is all of a sudden meaningless to you. Will a bad store today matter to, you get my point, right? Is their lens is much more orientated to things that data science might not be able to help with, right? And that's a philosophy issue, right? So it might help. So for instance, AI could help them in figuring out long-term trends, but it's much harder to figure out how exactly it will help, right? I think humans are much better at sensing what's happening on the ground, speaking to people around, politics and so on. So it's the problem is your philosophy. I think that's likely to be a differentiator. And if there's clustering, it's likely to happen within that lens. Is you'll have still your traditional styles, quality, growth, and so on, and then you'll have maybe a larger concentration in the short to medium space where we play. At the moment, by the way, that yeah, I think we're probably one potentially who are only looking, one or two earning cycles. And to be clear, the fact that we are looking at one or two earnings cycles into the future doesn't make us, in our view at least, short-termist, because that's a problem. But we believe that any long-term change still has to happen, unfold within a few reporting cycles. If there's a problem that can't be solved within a few reporting cycles, it's likely that there's incompetence, or it's simply not something we need to invest in from a risk-reward perspective, right?
Musa, thank you so much. It's absolutely fascinating, and I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and IP with us. And we wish you all the best as you continue to progress and develop all of this. And we'll definitely be chatting to you further as we share that knowledge with our industry. So thank you for joining us at the 2025 EBNet Evolutionaries Conference, and we will see you shortly.
Thank you. Thanks.